He built $1 million startup in a basement. His partner stole it, vanished overseas, and left him with nothing but a broken laptop and a name no one remembered. But what happens when the silent genius fights back, not with lawyers, but with something far more dangerous? Mason Leary had never seen money like that before. Not growing up in a rusted-out two-bedroom in Youngstown, Ohio, where the winters were hard and the water pipes even harder. His dad sold scrap metal when he wasn't drinking. His mom left when he was 9, and no one in the neighborhood ever asked why. But Mason was the quiet kind. Observant. Always watching. While the other kids were throwing rocks at abandoned cars, Mason was picking the locks on their radios just to see how the wiring worked. He didn't care about noise. He cared about systems. About control. By 29, Mason had 3 failed ventures, 2 maxed-out credit cards, and a second-hand MacBook with a cracked screen that flickered like an epileptic firefly. He lived in a basement apartment behind a laundromat. The walls sweated. The power went out when someone used a hairdryer upstairs. Then came Jude. Jude Harrow walked into his life like a summer thunderstorm, all charisma and clean shoes. He had a smile that could sell you back your own coat, and an instinct for people. If Mason saw the code, Jude read the room. They met at a pitch night in Columbus, Mason mumbling through a slideshow about predictive inventory software, Jude with a rum and coke and too much confidence. Jude didn't say much that night, but he emailed Mason the next morning with a line that changed everything. You build it. I'll sell it. 50/50ths. The startup was called Inventory IQ. Boring name. Brilliant execution. They didn't reinvent anything, just made a cleaner, faster tool for mid-sized suppliers who still ran on spreadsheets and chaos. Jude pounded the pavement, pitched to every tired warehouse manager and frazzled procurement officer he could find. Mason built like a man possessed. Sleepless months, missed calls from his sister, a birthday he forgot. And then, it happened. An angel investor out of Denver. 40-year-old ex-supply chain VP with too much capital and a fondness for underdogs. He wired $1.2 million by the end of the week. The software scaled. The contracts rolled in. A Midwestern industrial distributor signed on for a 3-year deal, and suddenly they weren't scrapping together rent, they were booking business-class flights to Chicago. Mason saw real money for the first time. 6-figure months. A shared office with glass doors. Health insurance. Jude wore better shirts now, started speaking in buzzwords, Series A, runway, pivot. Mason didn't care. He was coding, and it was working. Until he came into the office one Tuesday and Jude was gone. No note. No voicemail. Just a desk with no laptop, a disconnected number, and a company bank account that had bled dry overnight. Inventory IQ, Mason discovered, was now registered in Belize. And every dollar was gone. At first, Mason thought it was a glitch. He refreshed the banking portal 5 times, cleared the cache, rebooted the router. The screen didn't change. Balance, $7.82. He stared at it, unblinking. His brain, wired for logic, tried to calculate what couldn't be computed. They had over $380,000 in liquid funds just last week. He remembered checking before ordering a batch of new server racks. Now, nothing. He called Jude again. Straight to voicemail. Tried his personal number, then his mother's landline, which Jude once used for some tax document. A woman picked up, raspy voice, said, "He ain't here no more. Don't call again." Mason walked in circles for 2 hours. The floor beneath him felt unstable. Then, as if on muscle memory, he pulled up the code repository. The login still worked. His domain name was intact. But the admin email had been changed. Ownership, transferred. He was locked out of his own company. The lawyer in Dayton charged $350 an hour and didn't offer coffee. After reviewing the documents, the Delaware registration papers, the contract Mason and Jude hastily drafted in a bar with sticky tables, she gave him a look that cut deeper than any betrayal. "You never filed a formal partnership agreement," she said. "No vesting schedule. No equity terms. Nothing enforceable. It's his company now, on paper. Mason blinked. But, we built it together. She almost smiled, tiredly. I don't doubt that. But business isn't about fairness. It's about paper. That night, Mason drove the 4 hours back to Columbus in a daze. The lights of the highway blurred past like smudges. It was autumn. The air had that cold bite to it, the kind that reminded you winter was coming whether you were ready or not. He parked outside the old laundromat, but didn't go inside. Instead, he sat there, engine running, hands still on the wheel. He tried to feel something. Anger. Grief. Even rage. But mostly, he just felt stupid. He replayed the early days in his head, the late-night coding sessions, the shared pizzas, the laughter after landing their first client. Jude had called him brother back then. Told him, we're gonna be legends. Now Mason was just a ghost in a story someone else would tell. 2 weeks later, a journalist called. Mr. Leary. This is Kendra Sloan from TechPulse Weekly. We're running a piece on the rise of inventory IQ. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Mason almost hung up. Then paused. Something inside him, deep and bitter, cracked open. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was revenge. Or maybe he just wanted someone, anyone, to know the truth. Kendra Sloan didn't waste time. She met Mason at a coffee shop near the Ohio State campus, a hipster kind of place with exposed brick, sad jazz, and drinks that cost more than Mason used to pay for groceries. She was sharp, mid-30s, the kind of woman who didn't blink much. Wore a leather satchel and smelled faintly of citrus and ink. She asked for a flat white. Mason just asked for water. You built the original inventory IQ framework, she asked, pen ready. Yes, Mason said. Every line of back-end code, the UI, even the first few client integrations. And Jude Harrow's role. Mason hesitated. He hadn't spoken the name out loud in weeks. He was the voice. The suit. He knew how to sell what I made. We agreed on 50-50. Nothing in writing, stupid, I know. She nodded, neutral. And now? He stripped the accounts. Changed the ownership. Moved everything offshore. Kendra didn't blink. She was already scribbling. Do you have proof of your contributions? Code archives. Old emails. Slack messages. Even a few video calls where we sketched the roadmap together. She stopped writing. Would you be willing to go on record? Mason stared at her. He wasn't the kind of man who liked the spotlight. His work had always been behind the scenes, logic gates, recursive loops, silent efficiency. But now that his life's work had been stolen and scrubbed of his name, what was left? He nodded once. Yeah. I want people to know. The article dropped 10 days later. The Silent Founder, How One Man Built a Company and Got Erased. It wasn't sensational. It was surgical. Kendra outlined the timeline, Mason's early work, Jude's sudden disappearance, the financial paper trail. She quoted Mason at length, included screenshots of his code timestamps, early product mock-ups, even a client testimonial from their first big deal. It went viral. Not because people cared about software, but because people loved a villain. Jude Harrow, the slick-talking wunderkind, was now a symbol of Silicon Valley's dark underbelly, charm without conscience. Mason's inbox exploded. Former clients. Developers. Even a few ex-investors who'd been ghosted. All of them with stories. All of them angry. And then came the email that changed everything. Subject. Interested in chatting. Sarah Mendez, Apex Capital. Apex Capital was a mid-tier venture firm out of Chicago. Sarah Mendez was its youngest partner, known for spotting undervalued talent and betting big. She flew Mason out the next week, first class. He wore his only blazer, still wrinkled from the back of a closet. They met in a high-rise overlooking the river. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Whiteboards covered in clean, black marker. Sarah didn't waste time. You built inventory IQ. Jude stole it. Now you're the face of the underdog story. Everyone's talking. You have two choices, disappear, or build something new. Something better. With us. Mason frowned. You want to back me? Even after all that mess? She smiled, razor sharp. America loves a comeback. They called the new venture TraceLogic. It wasn't just a rehash of inventory IQ, it was leaner, smarter, and more ambitious. Instead of tracking inventory alone, TraceLogic aimed to map entire supply ecosystems in real time. Every vendor. Every shipment. Every deviation. Mason had learned a few things from his first run. This time, every line of code had a time-stamped commit. Every contract had a lawyer's blessing. Apex Capital brought in a seasoned operations head, a CFO, and a marketing team that knew how to spin a story. And the story was gold. The underdog. The betrayed genius. The phoenix. Mason didn't like the media attention, but he understood its value. He gave 2 interviews, posed reluctantly for a profile piece in Inc., and turned down 3 book deals. He wasn't here to talk, he was here to build. But at night, alone in his new condo, he couldn't sleep. Not because of guilt, but because of the silence. Jude had vanished. No lawsuits. No public defense. Not a single word. The man who once filled every room with confidence had gone underground. Mason searched, obsessively. Belizean records. Fake LinkedIn profiles. Shell companies. Nothing ever stuck. One night, after too much bourbon, Mason clicked on an old video, a pitch they'd filmed together in the early days. Jude was laughing in it. He said, "Mason's the smartest guy I know. He sees patterns where the rest of us see chaos." Mason stared at the screen until it blurred. 6 months later, TraceLogic launched its beta. 12 enterprise clients on board within weeks. Apex was thrilled. Sarah Mendez flew in personally with a bottle of champagne and a promise, if the numbers held, Series A would close within the quarter. But just as Mason started to believe in the second chance, his past reached out and touched him. It started with a letter. Plain envelope. No return address. Just his name. Inside, 1 sheet of paper. You built the engine. But don't forget who taught you how to drive. J. No threats. No demands. Just a signature. Mason froze. He'd forgotten Jude's handwriting, elegant, arrogant. Every curve a flex. He showed Sarah. She frowned. It's postmarked from Mexico. Could be a prank. Mason shook his head. It's him. He's watching. That night, Mason didn't drink. Didn't code. Just sat by the window, listening to the hum of a city that didn't care who you used to be. Jude was out there. And he wasn't done. Mason started checking over his shoulder. At first, it was subtle, skipping crowded cafes, changing his routes home, locking his laptop even for bathroom breaks. But as the paranoia dug deeper, it took root. He installed motion sensors outside his condo. Paid for a private security audit. Replaced his phone twice. Sarah noticed. You think he's coming back to sabotage you? She asked over lunch, her tone more curious than concerned. I don't think, Mason replied. I know. He showed her the second note. This one had come a week after the first, taped to the front door of the TraceLogic office at 3 a.m. clean white cardstock. Same handwriting. You know how this ends. It always does. J. No fingerprints. No camera footage. Nothing but dread. Then came the breach. A Tier 1 client logged an incident, unexpected anomalies in data reporting. At first glance, it looked like a bug, a rogue update Mason hadn't approved. But deeper inspection revealed something else. A malicious injection. Precise. Elegant. Laced into the pipeline like it belonged. Whoever did it had access. Intimate knowledge of the code base. And a personal fingerprint. Mason knew that style. Jude had never been a coder, not really. But in the early days, he'd learned just enough to navigate, to manipulate. Mason had shown him how the systems spoke to each other. How code could be a weapon or a shield, depending on who wielded it. Now, someone was using that knowledge to bleed TraceLogic, one line at a time. Sarah pulled Mason into a war room with the board. "We need to go public," one exec said. "Full transparency. Clients need to know we're handling it." "Absolutely not," Sarah snapped. "We don't feed panic. We clean it up and trace the source." Mason sat quietly, hands clenched. He should have felt violated. Angry. Instead, he felt something worse. He felt seen. Jude wasn't just haunting him. He was testing him. Mason could almost hear his voice, smooth, playful, just a little cruel. "You wanted to be the hero, Mason. Heroes need villains." 2 weeks later, Mason flew to Mexico. He didn't tell Sarah. Didn't tell the board. Just booked a one-way ticket to Merida, where the first letter was postmarked. He spent 5 days in the heat, knocking on doors, bribing clerks, speaking broken Spanish with cab drivers and bartenders. On the 6th day, he found him. Jude Harrow, alive and smirking, sat at a beachfront cafe with a glass of mezcal and a paperback novel. He looked older, tanner, a little leaner, but not ashamed. Not at all. Mason didn't speak right away. He just sat across from him. Jude raised his glass. "You found me," he said, smiling. "Took you longer than I thought." They sat across from each other like ex-lovers who never quite decided who left whom. Jude's eyes hadn't changed, sharp, calculating, always amused. Mason studied him in silence. The warm breeze off the Yucatan coast stirred the corners of the tablecloth, and somewhere down the street, someone was playing a sad trumpet tune. "You sent the notes," Mason said. Jude sipped his drink. "Of course. You hacked the system." Jude laughed softly. "Don't flatter me. I don't write code, remember. But I remember enough to know where the soft spots are. And who to pay to press into them." Mason leaned in. "Why? You already took everything once. What's left?" Jude tilted his head, as if the answer were obvious. "You were supposed to fade, Mason. Be the guy who built something and got screwed, sure. People love those stories. But then you come back with trace logic. And investors. And headlines. That wasn't part of the arc." Mason's hands tightened on the edge of the table. "You wanted me to vanish," he said. Jude smirked. "You were better as the silent genius behind the curtain. Now you're front and center. Talking legacy. Vision. You're me, Mason. And that's my role." It hit Mason like a slow punch. Jude hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen identity. Control. Narrative. And now, with trace logic succeeding, Mason was rewriting the script Jude thought he'd finished. "That's what this is about?" Mason asked. "You can't stand that I didn't disappear?" Jude shrugged. "It's not personal." But it was. Mason could see it now, the pride behind Jude's grin, the flicker of jealousy in his voice, the need to remain the architect of the story even when he no longer owned the tools. Later, back at the small hotel, Mason sat on the edge of the bed with a burner phone and made one call. "Sarah. I found him." She didn't ask where. She didn't ask how. Just listened. "Don't do anything stupid," she said finally. "You're not that guy." But Mason wasn't sure. The next morning, he met Jude again. Same cafe. This time, Jude was already waiting with 2 drinks. "Truce?" Jude asked, sliding one across the table. Mason didn't touch it. "You're done," he said. "You're being investigated. Financial crimes, data breach, possible cyber terrorism. You crossed a line." Jude blinked once, then leaned back. "You wouldn't do that." "Already did," Mason said. "You wanted me to play hero. Fine. But even heroes get tired of waiting for justice to show up." Jude stared at him, that smug facade cracking, just a hairline fracture, but it was there. And for the first time, Mason realized something chilling. Jude had never planned for Mason to become a threat. Only a memory. Mason left Mexico the next day. But Jude didn't. Interpol flagged his passport within 48 hours. The Belizean shell company collapsed under scrutiny. And when Mexican authorities knocked on the door of a rented villa outside Merida, Jude Harrow's legend finally ended. Not with a trial, but with a quiet arrest and a headline that read, "Startup fraudster captured in Mexico." No mention of genius. No mention of legacy. Just the truth. The morning Jude was arrested, Mason stood by his apartment window, staring at the city that had once ignored him. The news broke within hours. Social media erupted. Investors called, not with worry, but congratulations. TraceLogic stock in the private market ticked upward. Sarah sent a 3-word message. "It's over. Finally." But Mason didn't reply. Because he knew better. The arrest didn't bring joy. No swelling orchestra of justice. Just stillness. Like stepping out of a storm to find your house is still standing, but the roof leaks and the walls creak differently. Mason returned to work. TraceLogic expanded. They moved into a new office, hired another dozen engineers, closed a Series A round with a staggering valuation. Mason smiled in the pictures. He shook hands. He gave quotes to Forbes about resilience and second chances. But he didn't stop looking over his shoulder. Because ghosts don't go to jail. Only people do. And Jude had always been more ghost than man. One night, after a long strategy session, Mason stayed behind. The office was quiet, save for the soft hum of servers. He walked past the glass walls of his own company and entered the darkened coding floor. Sat at a desk that wasn't his anymore. Laid his hands on the keyboard. For the first time in months, he wrote a line of code. Nothing important. Just a function to sort warehouse locations by urgency and shipping zone. But it calmed him. Like hearing an old song in a foreign city. He stayed for hours. Just building. Just remembering. A month later, he got an email. No subject. No address. Just a sentence. "You win. But you lost more than you know. J." Mason didn't reply. Didn't forward it. He just closed the laptop, walked to the window, and looked out. Below him, the city pulsed, lights blinking like nerve endings, trucks humming along midnight roads, people fighting their own invisible wars. He had his company. His story. But somewhere between betrayal and revenge, he'd lost the version of himself who once built things just to understand them. That boy in the basement behind the laundromat. That boy who never wanted the spotlight. Weeks later, Mason visited Youngstown. His father was long gone. The house had new owners. But the scrapyard still stood, rusting, half-empty, haunted by metal ghosts. He walked the perimeter. Listened to the creak of old machinery. A teenager behind the counter watched him warily. "You need something?" the kid asked. Mason smiled softly. "No. Just remembering why I started." Then he turned and walked away. Not all empires are built with crowns. Some are forged in silence. And some, the strongest ones, are built not for glory, but for peace.